Hey guys, when you work at a campground, there's a lot of things that you get to see. What's fun is seeing those that are out RVing for the very first time, or they're out RVing for the very first time with the setup that they're with, and they're not sure how to figure it out sometimes. And I like to help them out with that. So I want to help you guys out today, because I've seen the guys that are arriving because they have a rental, or they've borrowed an RV from their relative, or they've just bought one and they're going out for their first time, or even the guy that usually does the setup isn't with them. And so they're like, how does this all work? Stay tuned, we'll talk about it. So with your basic setup 101, there's a few things that matter, okay? There's a few other things that you'll just figure out as you go along. When Lisa and I bought our RV, I'd never hooked one up before to services, ever. Didn't know how to do it. I watched a lot of YouTube. Some of it I found, but some of it I had to figure out. So when you're arriving at your campsite for the very first time and you're not familiar with it, take your time, arrive early. I've seen people arrive at 11:30 at night to get into their campsite, and you think, well, there's neighbors that they're disturbing. They are going to not have a pleasant evening because setup is a mess, and maybe they'll figure out and do it in the morning, I don't know. But guys, arrive early, have some time. You know you need the time for setup, so come prepared with some time to do that. I know you're gonna have a great experience, you're gonna have a great weekend, but it starts best if you spend a little bit of time. Okay, so what do you do when you're checked in, you've got all this stack of paperwork and all the rules and all that, but you get to your site, what do you do first? What I suggest you do first is to check that you have proper power. What I mean by that is make sure that you open up the pedestal and whatever your rig plugs into is there and works. What I bring along with me everywhere I go is this little guy, okay? This is a 30 amp plug here that goes to 110, and this is a 110 volt meter that just tells me if it's set up correctly and if it has power. I plug that in, if it's green, I'm good to go. This is what I do first. So if that's good and the power is there and I'm ready to go, then I move on. What I want to do next is make sure that all of my utilities, my power, my water, and my sewer, I have the length of connection that I need so that I don't have to move the RV again. And if I'm connectable to all of those three things, then I'm ready to call it done and put on the parking brake and level it and do all of those things. Oh yes, there's one other big factor. Make sure you have room for your slides or your awning before you shut off that engine. Because a lot of people back up, there's a post right here, their slide will never clear it. But they don't know that until they stop and start setting up, and all of a sudden they realize they have to move. So make sure you have room for your slides and for your awning. Connect your sewer properly. Now, I never realized this before. I would take my elbow angle, drop it in the hole, put a rock on top of it, and I was good to go. Until the day I realized I can take the elbow off of it, thread it on, and have it completely secure before I put the hose back onto it to connect. Then I was airtight, and that made all the difference. And now it doesn't pop off or cause unpleasant odors every time I use that. I was new, I had no idea. Even though somebody said, well, thread it in, I'm like, well, how do I thread it in when it's connected over there? And I'm like, I only can turn it like so far, like half a revolution. No, it disconnects, you put it on 3 revolutions and then reconnect it. Didn't know that. I've also seen the people that arrive with just the hose, no fittings on the end, and they just shove the hose down the hole. Well, that's not airtight. Some campgrounds will say, sorry, you can't do that. Or in Vegas, you have to have the little feet things so that it's not touching the ground. And the municipality will come by and give you a fine if yours is sitting on the ground. So you have to be careful on that note. So, connecting your sewer properly. We're almost done. What are your setups with your valves once you're parked? So I never really understood this part until I'd been in it for a while. When I stop at a campsite like here, what I do is I get my sewer line connected, get my power connected, my water. What I do first is power. Second, I do water, because I can do sewer tomorrow. So if I have time, I do the sewer. And once the sewer line is connected, I open the valve completely of the gray valve. I leave the black tank valve closed. Let me tell you why. If you open the black valve and have both valves open, you're going to be opening the connection to the sewer to your black tank, and every time you go to flush, you're going to get that a little bit of air coming back up, and it's not going to be pleasant at all. And it'll also vent off the top of your RV, and everybody around you will say, why does it smell so bad around here? Leave your valve to your black tank to your sewer closed. And then once a week, you're like, hey, I need to dump that. Go ahead, put some water in your gray tank by closing that valve, put a little bit of water in your gray tank, open your black tank valve, let that drain out completely until that's done, put a couple of bowlfuls of water through so that it splashes out and through and flushes, then go and close the black tank valve, open the gray tank valve and put a little bit of water through that, and then just leave that gray tank valve open. And what you've done is you've also evacuated and cleaned out with gray water your sewer line. That makes sense? And then I go and add a little bit of additive to the black tank. You don't need to add it to the gray tank if you're sitting here for a few weeks, because your gray tank is continuously flushing. So there's no point putting some additive down there. It just goes down the drain. If you're going to be boondocking, then you put the gray tank additive in there also. I got a bonus for you. Working at a campground, you'll get people that will say, hey, everything was going great, but all of a sudden I don't have any power. So I've had this happen a few times. All right. One, just a few weeks ago, I drove out there. I found that he tried 2 different breakers, 2 different pedestals. And I'm like, well, that's not your pedestal. Why are you using it? Oh, because mine stopped working. Okay. So we went over to that pedestal, and sure enough, the breaker had gone. So I flipped the breaker and power was back on. Actually, that happened right here also. And everything was great. But I said, hey, the first one, I said, hey, you're on 15 amps. Running that AC, that's not going to work. He's like, oh, really? I can't run the AC on 15 amps? I'm like, no, you can't. AC is designed for 30 amps or more of a circuit. So he was disappointed, but that's what he rented. So, hey, know what you need before you rent. Number 2, this guy over here, his breaker went at the pedestal, so we just flipped it back, flipped it off, flipped it on, everything's good. Now, last year, when we were in Okotoks, 2 different times, I had somebody say, I have power, but not to my whole unit. And one guy was very sure it was our fault, that at the pedestal, one of the 2 poles had gone dead. And so I asked my father-in-law, I said, is that possible? He says, nope, doesn't work that way. I said, okay. So I went over there, and the second one, same problem. He threw out his toaster because it wasn't working. Threw it in the dumpster. Plugged something else in the same plug, didn't work. So it wasn't the toaster's fault. He'd already thrown out his toaster. So I said, I can fix this in 25 seconds. So I walked into his rig, I went to the GFI, I pushed the test button back to reset, and he had power to his rig. So guys, if you run out of power in your rig, that's the first thing to check. You can go to your breaker panel, you can go to your GFI, then go to your pedestal. If all of 3 of those doesn't show that a breaker is gone, well, who knows? Maybe you have a connection on your extension that went off or something. And when you're pulling into certain campgrounds, make sure all those hoses are long enough, because when we went to Anaheim, they have a curb, so you can only back up to the curb, And the sewer line is another 15 to 20 feet away, which means you have to have a pretty long extension to make that work. So there you go. Next time we'll talk about, in the future, we'll talk about sewer dumps at a dump station. They're a little different, and you just need to know the first steps on what to do there if you've never done that before. So I'm Kent, Living Light RV. We're grabbing life by the tail, and we're gonna see you next Thursday.
We're living light RV. We're grabbing life by the tail. God paints his pictures on our windshield every day. We're Kent and Lisa. Oh, we're glad to meet ya, no matter where we are. We're living life.
So get out there, go RVing, and have a great time. Okay, sometime over the next week, I'm gonna share with you the results that I got back from the museum. They said it was the best dinosaur find this year. Stay tuned.